Well, greetings, everyone. I want to welcome everyone to the ProTech Talk that we're conducting today on the subject of infill development strategies. We're tickled to have an outstanding panel to address this subject. And we're thankful and appreciative of all of your participations. We have well over 200 people in our audience today. So hopefully we'll be able to address some of the questions you've already proposed, some that are on your mind that you have not yet proposed, and we encourage you to do so through our chat line. And we will all benefit from the knowledge and expertise and experience from our panelists. So let's make this a productive hour and a half or so and have a good time doing it. So first of all, let me introduce our panel. To begin with, we have Ms. Jennifer Miskimins, Dr. Jennifer Miskimins. She is professor and department head of the Petroleum Engineering Department at the Colorado School of Mines. She holds a BS degree from the Montana College of Mineral Science and Technology and MS and PhD degrees from Colorado School of Mines. She started her career with Marathon Oil as a production and completion engineer and production foreman. She started teaching at Mines in 2002 and has held various appointments since then, leading up to her position as the head of the department. She specializes in well completions, stimulation, hydraulic fracturing, and associated production issues. And next on the group of panelists is Dr. Tom Blasingame. He is a professor in the Department of Petroleum Engineering at Texas A&M in College Station. He holds BS, MS, and PhD degrees from Texas A&M, all in petroleum engineering. In teaching and research activities, Tom focuses on petrophysics, reservoir engineering, diagnostics, analysis, interpretation of well performance, unconventional resources, and technical mathematics. And he's notorious for having one of the longest final exams ever recorded in petroleum engineering circles, but we won't dwell on that today. Some of you out there have probably suffered through one of those. Next up is Mr. Lee Matthews. Lee is the founder and president of Cornerstone Engineering, which he founded in 2002. And he grew the consulting practice for 12 years and was involved in a number of shale plays across the country. He was the founder and president of Cornerstone Petroleum Resources, which is a private equity-backed E&P company. And he went to school at the University of Texas at Austin, got his BS degree in petroleum engineering. And he has worked for Chevron, Marathon, Texas Oil and Gas, LL&E, EOG, and maybe most famously for Mitchell Energy back in the early days of I don't need no stinking proppants and some of the water frac technology that was developed early on and some of the early shale plays in the Barnett, or shale developments in the Barnett Shale. And lastly, we have Chad Centers. Chad is a region engineering advisor for ProTechnics division of Core Labs. He is in Oklahoma City. He specializes in completion diagnostics and has over 15 years of experience in the oil and gas industry, including stimulation and downhole tools in addition to completion diagnostics. He is a graduate of the Missouri University of Science and Technology, formerly known as the University of Missouri-Rolla, with a BS in chemical engineering and a graduate certificate in management and leadership. So there's the distinguished panel, and they have promised me that there is no question on the subject of infill development strategies that they cannot handle. So we'll check out and see if that's really true. Along the way, we're going to have some poll questions. And so all of you participants, including the panelists, are encouraged to participate in the poll, and we'll report the results back. It's going to be some interesting topics that have to do with the subject at hand. So feel free to be a part of the poll. We'll report the results and you'll have some insights as to how the industry feels on these topics. So let's begin with a starter question. Many of these questions have already been submitted by all of you, but we are certainly open for some additional ones. So the first question, panel, what are the key uncertainties that impact infill development decisions, and how can you increase confidence and decrease risk in making these decisions? What are the uncertainties? How can you increase your confidence and decrease your risk in making these decisions? Who wants to start off here? Don't raise your hand. I'm going to pick one.
I vote for Lee.
All right, I'll take it.
All right, go for it, Lee.
Well, I'll start off by kind of breaking it down into two major groups. Let's talk geologic uncertainties, and then as another broad topic, we can call reservoir uncertainties. One of the major things that we found early on that can affect our development plan is faulting. So clearly understanding the structural geologic environment is very, very important. And how do we decrease that risk? Well, obviously, 3D seismic is an outstanding tool for identifying faults and fracture patterns, azimuth, displacement, and such. When we first started developing the Barnett Shale, we thought we had a blanket reservoir. And to be honest with you, to our shame, we thought geology was not going to be as critical as it had been in the past, when you had to pick a geologic feature and go drill, and sometimes you hit it, sometimes you had this thing called a dry hole. But as we see today, geology is every bit as important, and something that we really need to spend time understanding. I'd say, natural fractures are another element that were very influential in the success of the Barnett. Just using that as a reference point back in the early days. But natural fractures clearly influence the drainage pattern. They also influence our induced created natural fracture system that we're trying to place. Obviously, there's a lot of data that can go into analyzing and determining natural fractures, whether it's lateral image logs, MWD data at the bit or in a tool string, tracer data that we get on offset wells, and so forth. There's a tremendous amount of data that we can collect trying to characterize natural fractures. And then the last geologic factor I would throw out for discussion is facies changes. And we drilled horizontally thinking that things are all level and parallel, but we find that's not always the case. So, vertical pilot logs, mud logs, NWD, gamma drilling is also real helpful. The other category I was thinking about was reservoir. The rock mechanics has really taken off in its importance in the last 10 years. And that's critical to see how we vary across the lateral in terms of the rock mechanics. But, simple hydraulic fracture geometry versus what we're trying to do, highly complex fracture systems that expose, the maximum amount of rock. But those are just kind of a framework for us to think about and discuss as we think about infill drilling.
All right, great. About the two. Anything to add?
I'll add to the pore pressure depletion profile of some of the original wells. It's not an easy answer, but understanding where some of those, you can't just assume that that's uniform from the original wells. And tied together with that, I think then the efficiency of the original well completions. If you're talking with the horizontals, how far apart were the original stages placed, how efficiently were each of those completed, if they were a plug and perf, how many of the clusters were missed. And so you're going to see some pretty potentially very irregular pore pressure depletion profiles. And I think those obviously, not only from a drainage standpoint, but also from the completions associated with the infill wells themselves and where you might see hits happen. I think that plays a big role too. How how you decrease that uncertainty is a little bit of the key factor. You know, to an extreme, we look at some pretty detailed modeling that can help you with that. But to Lee's point, you got to understand the geology to understand how to put those together. So I'd toss that out too.
Okay. All right, let's move on to a second question, excuse me. Tom, how would you evaluate the optimum economic timing for infill development? Is there like a point of no return in which it becomes too late to infill? You know, how would you determine the optimum timing?
You know, as an academic, I don't deal in trivial matters such as economic development timing and other things like that. However, never being one to back down from an opportunity to hear my own voice, I would say we probably know that 400 feet spacing is too tight. We probably know that 600 is on the edge. We probably know that 800 is probably okay, and depends on the play, of course. And you're going, what the hell does that have to do with economic infill development? I'm not suggesting that we can never go back and infill, but I'm suggesting that the reason we have the parent-child problems we have is because we infilled in a way that we didn't think about, you know, that everybody thought they were going to be smarter than they were. Everybody thought they were going to outsmart the rock or the system. You know, even when we developed entire sequences at the same time and brought the wells on slightly differently in time because the facilities weren't capable of handling all the fluid, you can see a degradation effect from that immediately in some of these plays. I was preaching not cube development, but that we should try to figure out what pattern we want, develop it on that, and, you know, not duck it, but going ahead and produce it back, assuming we could support the fluid load. I'm really afraid I can't answer anything about infill because I'm afraid that every bad infill case confirms how poorly, as Lee and Jennifer implied, that we know the geology, we know how the completion interacted with the geology. I'm trying to say this in as polite a way as I can. I think we need to drill and complete all these wells as closely in time as we can. Everybody's got a horror story, and I can remember a couple where, you know, someone said, what do you think about an infill well there? And I said, why don't you just give me the money and we'll call it even, you know? And it wasn't that it didn't meet expectations. It didn't meet anything. You know, we could have, we'd have a lot more of that. And from an economic standpoint, depending, of course, on oil price, depending on perspectives of how demand is and everything else. And I know we're going to get to this, but personally, I believe we're going to be in a demand-driven scenario for a long time. Supply is available now, but in a couple of years, you know, maybe not. And, you know, hopefully we don't go back to our old habits. I think this is a time to breathe it through and to see if we can do some optimal practices. Now, everybody out there is going, okay, so what's he really saying? Can we go back and measure? Can we evaluate? Anybody who's reviewed infill development knows that you're going to lose 30 to 50% on your infills unless there's something unique about the geology or unique about how you did the spacing. How can you justify that? And I'm going to throw this now back to Jennifer and Lee, because maybe they have a different opinion. You know, all I know about economics, and I didn't go to the University of Texas like Lee did, but a dollar is worth the most when you have it in your hand. So I guess the logic is to get it out as fast as possible. And that would be why we'd be having this discussion. But from my standpoint, I'd like to maximize recovery as well. I think that's a bigger issue.
What do you think, Lee? And while you're in the spotlight, Lee, you might, for those who don't understand the cube concept, you might give us a quick explanation is what Tom means by this cube view of the reservoir.
Sure. Well, you know, economic timing to me is like the key words in this question is, you know, how do you evaluate this optimum economic timing? And I'm thinking of a case in my own company situation where we're surrounded by other operators that had the cash flow, they had the capital available to go in en masse and develop what they thought was the entire resource base in that drilling unit. And to the point of the cube being, it's not just lateral spacing, but also vertical spacing, depending on how many members in that drilling unit are economic targets. So if you've got, let's say, bench A, B, C, well, the spacing on A may not be the same optimal spacing in terms of lateral distance between well bores as maybe B or C. You may be able to get 4 wells in a unit on A and maybe 6 or 8 wells in B, for example. But so if you go in and you look at this unit and you say, well, when's the best time for me to drill this up? I think everyone's coming to the conclusion that you need to save your money and do it all at once. The parent-child thing is killing us. So it becomes an economic consideration for the company that's contemplating what to do. You know, what is their cash flow availability? What's their financing availability? Can they go in and can they afford to develop this entire drilling unit from top to bottom all at once? That's the way to get the maximum reserve recovery, but there's other real factors that may come into play in that particular company's decision. We're seeing in the financing world, we're starting to see some of these things where a partner comes in with drilling dollars and they get their rate of return for that drilling program, and then they back in for some working interest and some creative financing. So it's a very interesting, it's a very timely, and it's a very complex question. Obviously, there's not a single answer that's going to apply to a variety of drilling units. So you have to look at each one in its own merits from a technical standpoint, but then you throw in the economic realities of, you know, do you have the money to develop it? And obviously, in an ideal world, we would spend all that money a couple of months before the prices take off and we see the demand-driven market.
All right, Jennifer.
Jennifer, can I jump in for just 1 second and say something? I don't want to agree with Lee out of courtesy. I want to agree with him out of fact. How many of us have sat in meetings and argued about which well to turn on when, how to move well A, well B, well C, well D, 50 feet, east or west, or up or down? And is that really what we need to be spending our time on? You know, we need to come up with a design that we believe in and come up with a process that we can live with that fits our facilities and go, you know. And frankly, I can't speak for everybody. I can only speak for the people I encounter, which is a large cross section. But the companies that allow their younger people to have some latitude seem to have done better than companies that say, we're going to drill a cube. It's an opinion. You guys can argue with it, but just appears to be my experience. Now, you know, I don't see anything in the Q&A or the chat, so I guess everybody agrees with me. How's that? Okay, Jennifer, your turn.
Oh, well, I was going to thank Buddy for asking you guys that question because I didn't even want to touch it. But I think if anything we've learned is don't do infill if you can avoid it, right? I mean, the horse is out the barn door and running down the road on most of what we do. It's the problem's already there. But if you're starting in, yeah, start from scratch. Don't try not to do the infill. And if you have to space it and have a really odd spacing depending on what your benches look like, what your pore pressure is, what your permeability is and everything, throw that dart out there, go for it. You know, let the cards fall where they may. You're probably going to be a lot better off than picking it up along the way. And I think, Tom, to your point, you know, some of the out-of-box thinking a little bit maybe helps with that. Some some oil and gas commissions might not be thrilled about the spacing asks that go along with that, but that might be the best thing from the industry standpoint and from the recovery standpoint.
Well, when we were all younger, we used to get screamed at to go do something innovative, at least drill a dry hole every now and then. I mean, why aren't we challenging people on infill to, instead of infill drilling a producer, why not infill drill a gas injector? And yes, I know some people are actually contemplating that in addition to Huff and Puff, but let's face it, there's going to be failures, and something like that may fail every time, but it also may give us insight into how we recover additional fluid. This is not something that we're necessarily thinking about right now, but when you're leaving 95% of it down there, that ought to keep some of us up at night.
All right, one quick chat question, then we probably ought to go to a poll question. This has just recently come in. The comment is, part of the challenge in avoiding infill, especially in a new play into the development phase, is getting acreage held by production, and you may not have the capital to develop all of it in a cube-like pattern and have enough capital to keep leases before they expire. So how do we feel about that comment?
Well, that's real world. That's the life that so many of our people are living right now. What we want to do from a technical and recovery standpoint may be inhibited from financing opportunities or financial flexibility.
I mean, the honest to God answer is they're going to have to do whatever they're going to have to do, Lee. And if they have to drill a single well to hold production as opposed to losing a lease or, something of that nature, they're going to do it. And we can't argue with that. And the way this is worded is that we should try to, and the second question as well, is that we should try to go back and, sell ourselves that we can take one of those held by production, one well per section or one well per 2 section cases and drill it up. What's going to happen near the parent well. The obvious answer is to stay away from it or to come up with some other tactic. I thought, honestly, that the downturn or this, whatever it is, this, apocalyptic crash, and yeah, you can trademark that by my name if you want, but, I thought it wasn't going to eliminate infills. I thought people were just going to realize that they can't take the chance anymore on the possibility of having significantly poor performance than they thought. That's my opinion, but looks like people still want to try to do that because on paper it looks great, but I don't think the reality has proven itself out yet. And we didn't invite someone to defend cubes, but I would ask, show me a cube that has exceeded expectations than compared to the ones that haven't. And
one more quick question for Chad here before we go to the poll question. Chad, this is one of the chat questions. Can you comment on your thoughts regarding completion designs, improvements, changes to help mitigate the effects of depletion on the child well? Maybe fluid system changes, far field diversion techniques. In other words, given your background with completions, especially in diversion, you've written some papers on that subject. What do you see as some of the better options to try to offset some of the difficulties that we know we're going to have with some of these infill wells?
So, due to the stress difference that you have from the depletion of the parent well, I think you would want to really caution the use of near wellbore diverter and make sure it's optimized and it's working for you. I think we've seen a lot of improvement in limited entry with extreme limited entry that can get you a lot better cluster efficiency and even stimulation distribution. It's a little less riskier. Diverter does work in some cases. It just takes you a while using diagnostics such as proppant tracers, and fiber and others to get you there, so you're not causing that detrimental diversion that's going to cause possible supercluster development that's going to be hard to really get out of when you're talking about well-to-well communication. Now, we have seen some positive results with far field diverter, as far as comparing the amount of, oil and water tracer communication over time to those offset wells, utilizing far field diverter, maybe in conjunction with some of the newer pressure monitoring diagnostics that are going on that you can do in real time, such as seal well bore pressure monitoring that Cal Hospite and Devin guys came up with. If you had a chance to listen to him or read that paper, it's really, really exciting stuff. So maybe testing out your far field diverter with real-time fracture, interaction.
Great. All right, we got to do a poll question. I'm going to get kicked out here. So we got a poll question ready, Derek? There we go. All right, everybody jump in there and answer the question. What is your current fracture-driven interactions mitigation strategy? Pick one.
Since we're academics, can we just
No,
thank you.
just pick one, Tom. Don't complicate things here.
I'd also comment, I'm getting emails about the backwards hat, so I'm going to show you why.
Okay, thank you very much for that.
And for those of you that are genuinely
Moment
afraid
there.
of what's coming next, it's not a MAGA hat.
Well, now we can't see your face, so I think I prefer it the other way. There you go. All right.
It's also not a University of Texas hat. Sorry, Lee.
Okay, are we going to show the results on this one or show them all later, Derek?
Well, you can do another question, give some people a chance to answer, that we can circle back around to it.
Okay, sounds good.
Hey, buddy, I really like Tom Wagner's comment on high grading infills. I would agree with that, Tom.
Yeah, you
That's
might.
that's what I was trying to say, only, I didn't have the right words. So thank you.
Yeah, we've had a number of chat questions come in here. See if I can handle a few more of these. And a lot about the acreage positions and financing. One from one of our folks, the reality is that most of the tier 1 acreage has been explored with parent wells. So what can we do once we already have an existing well that is 2 to 3 years old?
Like I say, Mr. Wagner said it best, that, if it's a high grade area, then get 1,000 feet away from it and give it a try. Maybe 1,500 feet. I don't know how Lee and Jennifer feel, but I would do some tests around that.
Okay.
Well, I think there's clearly, as price fluctuates, as prices go up, the available cash flow from the production we have is generating the funds that we need to go in and further develop our acreage. And so the well spacing on high gas prices or high oil prices, the well spacing can narrow. But as go down, we have to have more production per well, and so spacing has to get wider.
Yep.
So there's kind of a basic, we all know that's kind of a basic relationship, but it is true. And so if we take a spacing of, let's just say 1,000 feet, and what we're trying to do is economically increase the amount of recoverable oil, then increasing the number of clusters, shortening the cluster spacing. We're trying to improve that 95% that Tom mentioned earlier. I'm too awake at night wondering how do we get more oil out of the ground on an economic basis? And I think that's what people are trying to do by treating more clusters in a single stage and doing it over a broader portion of the lateral. So just cutting down the cost of the overall completion, and at the same time trying to enhance the recovery within that footprint. How do we do that? And that's where we're seeing thinner fluids, smaller proppant, more clusters, grouping these clusters in like rock and in comparable rock mechanics, so that we don't have as big a challenge in limited entry overcoming these variations in rock properties by withholding that pressure in the wellbore by having big chokes down there that we're pumping through, trying to overcome rock mechanics. It is, I agree with Chad, that that's been the most economic successful way to do it, is extreme limited entry. We'll get to more questions on that later. But I think that's the goal we're all trying to figure out. How do we employ, on a unit by unit basis?
Very good. Any other techniques that you have seen to be effective in doing the infill wells? What about refracs? How do you feel about refracs as an option versus recharging?
The first thing I do is always look and see how many perforations they put in the borehole, and then I go, oh, there's 1,000 holes in it. What are you going to do? You're going to squeeze it all off? You're going to put a liner in? This is not my area, so it's real easy for me to be, comical. But there was a time 15 years ago when I thought refracs were the key to everything, but the key to everything is right placement. Are we going to be able to put the proppant where it needs to go? Proppant and fluid, pardon me. I mean, can we come up with an economically viable way to refrac a well where we know we're putting things where we should be? And some of you are going to comment that it won't matter. We're going to, just by recharging, we're going to open new parts of the formation. I'm okay with that. But is there something that we can do during a refrac that maybe we couldn't do during a regular frac? This is actually probably the single most often asked question that I get, and I just don't know who's going to be first to really embark on a refrac campaign economically.
Yeah, I think
Jennifer, you're a frac person.
I'm a frac person.
About refracking, do you think that's an appropriate option here?
Yeah, I do. I mean, you're gonna have to charge somehow if you're gonna help yourself out at all, or you're not gonna do anything. So if you got to charge anyway, why not try and use it to your advantage? I think we're learning that a lot of our completions from 10, 15 years ago were horribly inefficient as far as, treating maybe half the wellbore. And so if you can figure out where some of those gaps are, if you can figure out where some of that, I know here in the DJ, there's some folks having some pretty good success with fully expandable, liners, when fully expandable across the entire length of some of the original horizontals. And, they've been able to figure out where you want to place some of those missed opportunities in the first place. And I think if anything, fiber and some of our newer diagnostics have shown us we've got those gaps. So, if the economics play it out, and obviously that's always the key, but, you can use the recharge and maybe benefit in that original well too, then, why not?
About it, Chad?
I would say your best refrac candidate is the one that had the poorest original completion.
Mm-hmm.
I think you learned that in the Mitchell Energy days, didn't you?
The best economics I've ever been associated with are vertical refracs. It's a different ball game when we turn sideways and we're horizontal. It's a much more complicated problem, as you all know. But I would agree that if you're in an infill development program and you've got an early vintage well that was far from what the designs are today, you've got a good opportunity to enhance that well's productivity and ultimate recovery at the same time you're doing your infill program.
Yeah. Lee, since you worked so much in Barnett, I did some refracs, and the original spacing was 1,000 feet apart clusters. And I'm like, hey, I can even figure that out.
Yeah, we had some really good refrac candidates back from the early 2000s.
Yeah.
And there were some parent-child relationships in the Haynesville where you actually saw the parent come back at 3, 4, 5 times the current production. I know Chad's aching to tell his story, but I just wanted to throw that in. I mean, it's going to be play dependent. Some of these aspects are. And when we're done after Chad, I want to ask, are we pumping the right proppant? But go ahead, Chad.
How about it, Chad? Refracs versus recharges?
So
version?
What we've seen a lot with the prop and tracer diagnostics is that a lot of times on a bullhead reef rack, diverter is introduced very early, and nearly all of the time, if not every single time, we've got diversion back towards the heel, 1 to 2 most clusters on the well, very early on within the stimulation treatment. So you're treating only 1 to 2 clusters with this giant reef rack. So the introduction of diverters has got to be a little bit more strategic than that. It doesn't seem to matter too much about what type of diverter, if it's ball sealers or particulate diverter or some of the other stuff that's out there. It seems like if you can bullhead and get fluid movement from at least the heel all the way to the toe. Now you don't control which perforations they're going to. I think it's nice to have new perforations in there to give you access to new rock as well. But I think there's a good future for bullhead reef racks still, and they've got a bad name, probably because of how ineffective they were executed with that early introduction of diverter that wasn't optimized. Now, the liner reef racks are awesome. Been involved in a lot of those projects. Nearly all of them are successful. Price point I've heard on them can be 70% of a new well completion, which, is, if I'm going to buy a used car, for 70% of a new car price, I think I'm just going to go ahead and get the new car and drill a new well. But that's just me. I think some people could probably handle that better.
Is there no benefit to trying it now? Is the cost of service reduced? I mean, if you reduced it from 70% to 50 or 40%, do you think? No, but I mean, would that happen right now? Would people be willing to cut cost of services to get that kind of work? Don't know.
It's possible. You got a lot of hardware in the well for those.
Yeah, I know. It's cost of the expandable tubulars.
Well, speaking of reef racks, here's a chat question. How do you value the cost of a reef rack versus the cost of an infill? In some cases, portions of the acreage may have better economics from reef rack with all the variables considered, age, EUR produced, spacing, completion, geology, etc., with how far along reef rack technology has come versus higher cost for a new well infill and new frac into depleted zones. Kind of a long question. You can follow all the ins and outs of that question.
For me, for the reef rack side of it, I think, we look at reef racks now, it's a lot different. You're not trying to reestablish conductivity like you were reef racking in conventional wells 25 years ago or 20 years ago, right? So reef racks are going to be successful if you can find that new area of the rock that wasn't originally treated. That's going to be your best bet. When you look at the decline rates on these wells and how steep they are, a year or two down the road, you're just not going to have the pore pressure available for cleanup in some of those areas that were already treated along that horizontal well. So from the reef rack side of it, I think it's how successful can you be in finding where those gaps are and using that to your advantage. That's where we've seen probably the best success with some of the reef racks. And Lee mentioned the really good, it's the vintage too. When were those completed? What were those originals? What we know now in hindsight, we're probably pretty inefficient. Can you tap into that? You're going to see some benefits with reef racks. If you don't have that and you just are retreating what was already retreated and is drained, then I don't see where you're going to see a lot of benefit from that.
Okay, let's look at the results from the first poll question here, Derek. So, wow, do nothing was well up there. Small preload parent wells seems to have nosed out the other candidates, with the emphasis on small preload, not large preload. Let me ask another question that's kind of related. One individual asked, instead of recharging or preloading the parent well, what about just increasing the pad volume on the nearest infill well? Instead of dealing with it at the parent well level, why don't you deal with it at the infill well level to accomplish much the same purpose? Does that make sense? Is that reasonable?
Well, I would say that if you've got a parent-child problem that you're going to deal with, and instead of increasing the pore pressure around that parent well, you're going to try to overcome it with an extended pad. To me, that enhances the probability you're going to move some of that original proppant from the parent well, either displace it where you've lost conductivity for production, or potentially you could actually put it into the parent wellbore. We've seen cases where the parent wellbore was significantly damaged, expensive workover required to get it back, and find frac sand in that parent well. And we don't think that frac sand generally came from the child well. We think it's actually, proppant that was originally placed from the parent well. So to me, increasing the pad volume, it probably makes that a greater risk. So I wouldn't do it.
About the rest of you, bad idea?
Well, I think you risk creating an additional half length by having that larger fracture created during the pad. Could end up getting you in more trouble than what you're trying to avoid.
Okay. Here's one that I often ask myself, and we've asked it a number of these ProTech talks. What are your thoughts on changing the frac design on the fly as pressure interaction is seen between the parent and the child wells? In other words, you're starting to see a frac hit on the parent-child. You're just going to continue on with the frac design? Are you going to change something? Are you going to toss in some far field diverters? You're going to shut down and have all kinds of issues with the frac company? And so what are you going to do? You going to do anything real time, or are you just going to have to gut it out? What's your recommendation?
Well, we're spending money every moment that we've got those pumps running, and we're pumping fluid and sand and chemicals. And so if we don't feel like we're doing something positive, creative, then we're spending money that's not generating NPV. So whenever we're trying to optimize NPV, we have to ask ourselves, am I doing myself good? Well, if I've got a hit and I'm communicating with an offset well, generally that's not going to get better with time. It's probably going to get worse with time. So I kind of liken it back to the early days when we were trying to stay out of the Ellenberger. And, we started seeing these pressure drops when we were communicating with some rock out of zone, out of the target we were trying to stimulate. Well, if you're pumping and you're losing fluid or proppant to something that's not going to generate production, then you're just spending money and you're not going to get anything for it. So I would say yes. I believe in real-time frac design changes and frac execution adjustments based on what the well or offset wells are telling us. Is something that we've done over many years, and I've seen tremendous improvement in overall economics by making those real-time decisions, whether it's aborting the stage, changing the stage volumes, changing rates. Really, you've got all these things at your disposal while you're sitting there in the frac van, and when you can understand what is going on downhole and make real-time adjustments, there's definitely an NPV advantage.
Lee, when you were talking about the best refrac is the poorest original completion, did you mean operationally, the poorest operational part of that original completion, or just all around poor production the first time around? What was your primary target there?
I think that's a really good follow-up. Was it a poor design that we did, 20 years ago? Is that generated an opportunity for a refrac? Or was it something we did 2 years ago? The design was okay, but the execution was horrible. So I think either one could present an opportunity for refrac.
About it, Jennifer, what would be your prime candidates? The poor original design, or the just the poor production for whatever reason?
I mean, I still think, I still think the old adage, and sorry, I got dogs barking. I still think the old, the best well sometimes makes your best refrac candidate. So you know, it's a reservoir quality issue.
Yeah.
Got to look at the reservoir quality part of it, and then you also got to factor into what did the original completion look like. You know, did you have problems with that? Was there a gel used that didn't break? Was there something going on that caused that poor production from the operational standpoint, or, you know, was it reservoir? And you know, if it was reservoir, then I'm not sure if a refrac's going to help you out a lot in any type of reservoir, to be honest with you. So I think it's a typical professor answer. It depends, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a good point.
Look.
Both of those factors are important. The quality of the rock is a huge variable or a huge factor in excellent wells. But couple that with understanding, let's say you've got an offset well that did 10 BCF in the first 2 years, and it's, you know, that older well only did 1/4 of a BCF in 5 years. You obviously, and everything looks the same on your seismic, on your data set. There's really no explanation. Then you look in the historical file, and then you find out, oh, well, you know, they had all kinds of operational problems, or, you know, they had 2,000-foot stage intervals. And so, you know, I agree with you 100% that you got to look at good rock makes good wells. And if you have a well that's in an area that should be producing much greater than it did, that may be your best candidate.
Well, I know that Buddy's not calling on me because he's afraid of what I'll say, but I'm going to throw a reservoir
Don't
point
have to
here.
call on you. You just call on yourself. So go ahead.
Yeah, I do. You know, I find, like de Gaulle said, whenever I think about what France needs, I just ask myself. So when I think about what, you know, completions need, I just ask myself. So if you're going to start a refrac program, I think you should have a consistent, deliberate effort to evaluate the performance of those wells before you do this. I think that both Lee and Jennifer have stumbled onto something. It is about what was the original condition of the well. Was it a completion failure? Was it a vintaging issue? And that could be anything. I mean, they could have, I've seen people experiment with cutting the proppant in half just for the hell of it and then go, why didn't this work? You know, it could be that you are in a neighborhood where there's a lot of natural fracturing, and I know people don't necessarily believe in that. It's not my holy grail, but I've seen interference that looked like a crowded city street. Everything was talking to everything. And if that's the case, then I would agree that trying to re-stimulate in that area is probably going to just, you may as well light a match to the money you just spent. But if you can do some sort of diagnostic work on the wells before you consider a refrac, if you can go back and look and see if there was something relevant about how the well was vintaged, I'd say you're going to have a lot better luck. I'd also try to think about, you know, we keep talking about the difference between refracs and infill wells. You know, we could experiment with some highly, I know the industry hates the word experiment. What's the right word? We could try a new recipe. That's what it is. And, you know, try some infill wells that are completed perhaps differently than the others. I mean, you know that your fractures are going to grow towards depletion. Is there a way to mitigate that? And maybe Chad can jump in, maybe even Buddy can jump in. There's probably a way of drilling an improved infill well, but I just don't think in this scenario, this price, like we talked about earlier, that's going to work. Refracs, you guys have really got me thinking now that if we could get the companies to come down on their expandable liners, maybe that would be the way to go. But again, in this price scenario, I don't know. My philosophy would be go back and do the diagnostics on all these cases as best you can. And look, somebody's asked a question about how would you determine the effectiveness of production performance? Frankly speaking, and I'm not selling gauges, but I wish I were, I would put a gauge in every well. And I've told everybody who's willing to listen to that, I would. A couple of companies have put a lot of gauges in the ground. I think it's helped them understand their completions and their production. There was another question in the chat that asked Lee, can we really make a decision on stimulation design based solely on offset well observations? Well, if you have a bottom hole pressure gauge and you're picking up temperature and pressure fluctuations, I'd say that's a pretty good indication that you got a very serious communication issue. So I'll stop there. It was a little bit of a rant, but don't forget us poor reservoir engineers, you know, and I don't have a simple answer about what do you do whenever you have a stage that goes bad. I guess, Lee, I'm in your camp. You know, I'd probably stop, but then go ask my financial planner, and I seem to continue to put money into things that, you know, vaporize it. So,
All right, one more quick comment from Chad, and then we'll do a poll question. Chad, have you been involved in some of those wells with the seal pressure offset measurements? Have you seen any of those lead to changes in design, shutdowns, or do they typically just continue on pumping? And do you think that's the right course?
So I'll just talk to pressure monitoring in general.
Okay.
And where they make the decision to shut down is when you're going to have a detrimental frac hit, kind of like Lee was mentioning earlier. We're going to expect that to really knock off an offset producer that you really fully and plan on getting that production from. So your parent well, there's cases of casing damage and other things from the offset well communication from the infill wells. And if you can see those happening and you can do something about it by going to flush, for instance, not just shutting down your frac right away, but maybe just going to flush, displacing your sand and moving on to the next stage, you save some money, you risk that damage from happening to your offset well, and you can move on. It just seems like a good idea if you've got that data available. I think some of the challenges that we've seen with that is that there's a delay in the pressure, not the reading, but the actual pressure traveling from that well to the offset well. So whatever you're doing now, you're going to continue to increase even after you stop for a while.
Good point. All right,
that
question, Eric, before you kick me out here. What types of data will be most valuable for optimizing well spacing? Pressure gauges, completion diagnostics, reduction analysis.
this is what happens when you have a brain surgeon do toe doctoring. I mean, they're all three.
All the above.
Yeah. I mean, where's the all of the above?
No, sorry.
Well,
Tom,
you're
you're
gonna
already
make
selling those gauges.
me put production analysis because that's what I've been doing for the last 40
All
years.
right, click it.
No,
Just
I'm gonna push
Go with
pressure
the program
gauges.
here, Tom.
I did.
Okay.
I'm
Hey,
not
your check ain't
analysis.
cleared yet, buddy.
If in doubt, if you really don't have a preference, that middle one's not bad. Okay. All right. We'll get the results on that question here shortly. Tell us about the best tools that you've seen recently for monitoring FDIs. What have you been most impressed with as the technique of choice to try to get your arms around what's going on downhole and leading to whatever decisions you're going to make?
From my standpoint, I think Chad hit on it. The sealed wellbore pressure monitoring shows a lot of promise. It's relatively inexpensive. It gives you some pretty good insight on what's happening as you piece that together. I also, on the flip side of that, I suppose from an expense standpoint, I also like fiber a lot. Fiber's, I think personally, has opened our eyes a lot to what was going on downhole. We see something happening on the surface and we kind of try and interpret it and put blinders on or whatever. But the fiber, if you have a good analysis on it, I think we still need to understand what the analysis part of it a little bit more, but it sure does show us some gaps down there that we weren't seeing before. So kind of, for me, two ends of the spectrum maybe on that, but.
Okay. Go ahead, Lee.
The downhole pressure gauges in those wells, I'll back up. And one of the things we were talking about a minute ago, as far as these frac hits, depends on how much NPV is risk in that offset well. If it's a 2-barrel-a-day well that's basically uneconomic, we're not as worried about hitting that. So you got to take all these variables into account. But the downhole pressure gauges in significant wells properly placed that will give us information as to our geometry that we're creating and kind of fracture extension length and so forth. And the analytical side of it has really come a long way here in the last few years in trying to identify what that signal is telling us. Is it a direct hit? Is it just is it a shadow, or is it actual fluid communication into the wellbore? And getting better at determining which of these types of features is actually going on.
But the bottom line, Lee, is for $50,000 or less, you can have that information. But to not have it, you have nothing. You're back to, trying to figure out what direction you're going with a compass that has no needle on it. And, that there's a couple of questions about how do we interpret fracture directions? How do we do these sorts of things? The only thing I can think of, the only in situ measurement we have is pressure gauge. Now, Jennifer's right about fiber, but fiber is only telling you what's going on along the wellbore. Now, maybe you can help me, Jennifer, understand how we would tie that with activities offset. I don't, I guess you could see it influx coming in off the fiber. Is that how people are doing it?
Well, you can run the fiber in an offset well too, where you've got the
Correct.
fiber run and you're watching what's going on or around you. And quite honestly, to your point, I think that's probably showed us more what's going on out in the reservoir versus what specifically is happening in the well that's actually instrumented. But
okay. So the evidence implies the process. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, let's look at the poll results, see what the audience opinion is here.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's because that was the last thing you said.
Fantastic.
Was to vote in the middle.
I'm sorry, you're cutting out on us here, Tom. Here, we're discussing poll results right now. Completion diagnostics. Well, son of a gun. Production analysis is next. Okay. Pressure gauges. Now that's a little surprising.
That's the one I voted for. You put it on the.
It's a little surprising. Pressure gauges didn't do better than that, but okay. There's the results, folks.
We're talking.
Don't open the box you get from me at Christmas, okay?
We're talking about well spacing, not brackets.
Yeah, that's true.
Mm-hmm.
But there's the results on the advantages from these different techniques for optimizing well spacing in general. Okay, great. Let's move on to a little different topic. We're kind of getting a little bit bogged down in refracts and let's see if we can kind of slide over to another topic. One question that was asked was, what about can infill wells be used to improve chemical EOR? In other words, can there be another consideration here in selecting your infill well locations? Like in West Texas, where there's all kinds of flooding projects going on all around you. You're going to have to factor that in to your selection process, but can there be an advantage there with the infill wells and the existing EOR project? Does that seem like a prospect?
Seems like a Tom question to me.
Sounds like a what?
Tom question to me.
Ask it again.
The question, the way it was worded, can infill wells be used to improve chemical EOR? Not sure chemical is essential to that part, but you see a way that they could be.
Well, I think they were implying, can you do gas injection? I mean, right now, all of the gas injection cases are huff and puff, that I know of. I mean, there may be one or two that are continuous, but, and I know that I've met with operators and proposed continuous injection. It would be a possibility. I frankly think it'd be a really cool idea. Take the two outer wells and turn them on to gas injection if you've got the gas and produce off the infill and see what happens. I mean, I'm just making a suggestion. anything that we can do. What if you end up with, you know, doubling the recovery from that well by doing that? Maybe that'll pay for it if you have the gas, of course. So, and I know there's a big debate among pointy-headed academics as to whether or not it should be CO2 or natural gas, but you know, I'm not going to debate that.
Chad, what about, are you going to approach gas plays any differently than oil plays when it comes to infill development strategies?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because if you're looking at pumping a recharge or a preload based on the amount of fluids that you take out of gas well versus an oil well, that's going to be completely different if that's your mitigation technique there, or even refracking. I know some people are doing that percentage of the fluids taken out of the original well compared to the offset wells. I want to take that into consideration. And then also within the gas fields, how much has the completion technology evolved there versus the oil fields, right? So it could be a factor of, you know, the vintage of completions that they've had offset to the new proposed infill wells that are going in.
Okay, we have a little combat going on here behind the scenes about interference testing. What about interference testing? We haven't said much about that thus far.
Well, I responded to it. I said, if you have a gauge in every well, then everything is an interference test. The reservoir doesn't know the difference, guys. We have to put the instruments down there to measure it. Do you think the reservoir knows or cares what we're doing to it? You know, we have to communicate. We have to have, you know, the mechanisms to acquire the data to know what's going on. I can already see the questions that are going to come from that.
Now, in my mind, I was thinking interference all the while we've been discussing this parent-child interaction. I don't know if we didn't use that word, but it certainly has been a relevant part of what we've been talking about as we talk about infill drilling in a unit that's already got HBP'd by well, that interference between these infill wells, the child wells, we're certainly going to see the influence of that depletion that Jennifer has mentioned earlier, that's a critical part of designing that infill development plan, knowing how much production over what period of time that parent well, you know, has produced. The more production, the thinner the reservoir, you know, the further away we probably need to be when we step in there and drill that offset child.
Okay.
Anytime you're shutting in your wells, you may want to go ahead and do your interference test anyways, right? I think a lot of the time it's the production that you have to shut off that's a challenge to do these interference tests, especially if you're going to be shutting off wells in a certain sequence. Nobody gets really terribly excited about that.
So you guys are all big hunters, right? I mean, if you don't have a hunting camera out while your game is all over the place, you don't know where anything is, you know? So this is the analog I would use. Hopefully this sells people on the ideas of more monitoring. Of course, by the same token, you know, the next question that Craig threw out there is, how do we use single well gauges to estimate properties? And that is a real twist. I mean, but you know, Lee, you started by saying that life was pretty easy with vertical wells, but now we've got wells with 100 stages and, you know, 400 fractures, depending on who you believe, of course, you know, and which one is interfering the most. Well, you know, I don't want to say theoretically, but conceptually we can handle that problem, but not with single point measurements. I agree with Craig's point that we'll have to have multi-point measurements, and we'll have to have specific tests in order to evaluate reservoir properties as well. This is not, you know, sort of like I said before, the line between conventional and unconventional reservoir engineering and probably completions is gone. I mean, this situation has changed everything. We have to think of everything as our competitor now is whatever we do has to compete with conventional. So, you know, logically our processes and our engineering and everything else has to do that as well. But I think we can.
I'd add to Tom's comment on Craig's question is, do you foresee a set of type curves that would define different types of connectivity between wellbores in characterizing this interference phenomenon?
People are doing that now, Lee. I'm not going to say that there's universal agreement on whether that particular concept of using a fractal based or their anomalous diffusion or other kinds of theories are correct. I'm saying that there are people that are trying to monitor well-to-well performance with a comparative metric so they can understand how this one is more connected to that one. But I'm sort of the old school that we have to, and this is what Greg was describing, is we have to jar things. We have to test on off or change production or something to get those signals that we need to clarify the connections. Otherwise, it could be that we're back to a multi-party line and we're picking up events from all over the place. And I think that's where you were going. So sorry I interrupted.
Folks, we assured anonymity to the chat participants here, so we might ought to discontinue mentioning the names of the individuals that are going on behind the scenes here, just out of courtesy. Thank you very much for that. So how does, I think we touched on this a little bit in the cube topic, but are we really taking into consideration stratigraphic targeting into our well spacing strategies? Are people really doing that, or are they just talking about it?
Everybody I know is religious about it, but my sample size could be small.
Well, and I think you have to make the argument that you actually have to stay in zone first to take advantage of it.
Sure, but I mean, that was a discussion I was saying that people are deciding 50 feet, I'm sorry, there's my camera, up or down, 100 feet sideways, and they're religious about it. They're absolutely convinced that that's going to make a difference.
I've seen the sensitivity vary from one field to another. In some fields, 20 feet is optimal, some maybe 150. It just depends on the homogeneity and where frac barriers are, what kind of containment you have, how rough can you get and still stay in zone to create the more complexity. But targeting a specific stratigraphic interval is something that every operator certainly ought to be looking at in detail.
Great. All right.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. I'm a firm believer in it. Geology drives everything that we do. My point being is you can, from a reservoir standpoint, develop all you want. Your geologist does stay in this, and then from a drilling standpoint, we go out and we get in a hurry and we're out of zone real quick. So there's that trade-off there, I guess.
They drill them fast now.
Yeah, drilling fast doesn't always help us in the long run. It's a short-term thing.
Well, there's economics in staying in zone. Just how much money do you want to spend, and how much impact will it have on ultimate production? And as a completion guy, I think of it in terms of frac initiation. And if I'm trying to create the most surface area, then I want to be in a place where I'm going to get a lot of brittle rock, and I'm going to create a lot of fractures near the wellbore that's going to continue and splinter out as I move more far field.
All right, let's do another poll question here. We're getting behind. Hang on, Tom. What operational practices should be considered when completing child wells? That's going to lead into a question on perforating here in a minute, but I'm not suggesting you vote for that.
Yeah,
you could probably vote for more than one here, but just vote for the most important one, Tom.
They're, like Tom said, they're all important.
Realize that. Sorry. This is multiple choice, but it's not multiple choices. Okay, we'll come back to that one in a minute. See how that vote turned out. So speaking of perforating, what are your thoughts on perforating schemes based on well spacing? I've heard some operators talking about offsetting their perf clusters between the parent well and the infill well. What about it, Chad? Have you You heard of folks doing anything special with regard
You know,
to?
you hear a lot of people talking about things. Let's just take that example. If your clusters are relatively close together anyways, like most modern completions are, then trying to alternate them that much of a distance and hope to achieve anything, it might be a bit of a vain effort there in practice, especially because we see how often people actually perforate off depth in the horizontal wells. You may not be
Amen.
close to alternating there anyways.
That's a good point about off-depth perforating. Let me ask the academics here. Do you folks really believe that we can get within 10 or 20 feet of the targeted intervals when we're perforating in a horizontal well? That's been,
Pass. Pass.
that's not an option. It's not an option.
I mean, I thought you guys did a good job with this stuff. I thought that we were at a point now where, you know, I could brag on you and say that you could be within 10 feet vertically, laterally, and, you know, that nobody call me a liar, but I guess it's an issue. I know that the look backs that I've looked at historically, I'm talking about 10, 12 years ago, people realized they were perforating out of zone, or out of, I guess you'd say zone sequence. But I was under the impression you guys had a better handle on that now.
Well, if you have good depth correlation, if you have some sort of downhole correlation markers to work from, you know, your chances are obviously better.
But they're using gamma ray, aren't they?
Some are short joints. Yeah. If you're religious about that, then your chances are certainly better. But we see some real horror stories for those who are very religious about it.
Yeah,
If you don't have any diagnostics to tie it back to, you're perforating on the fly and you're perforating on the way up. And when you stop, you have a certain amount of momentum with those tools as well that can keep going. So you can make the depth whatever you want at surface. It's going to be on down to the 0.1 decimal place. But what's actually happening with those tools downhole a lot of times is there's a little bit of error.
What about Lee?
Oh, I was just going to make the comment on making sure you have your wellbore placed where you want it. Sometimes these targets have very little gamma ray variability. And so you could be anywhere within a 50-foot window and have the same gamma reading. So it's really hard to know when you're 1,000, 2,000, 8,000 feet out and you have very little in terms of gamma signature to distinguish, you know, where you are in the section.
And I'd argue too that I'd focus more on getting those clusters initiated than I would, you know, about are they plus or minus 10 foot or something, right? You know, we spend a lot of time on clusters and how many and how far their spacing should be and everything. But if you don't get them initiated in the first place, then it's kind of a losing argument across the board.
Agreed. I think we're just talking about the concept of engineered perforating. You know, if you're going to engineer the perforations, and we've worked with a lot of operators who attempt to do that, if you don't have good depth control on your perforating, you know, it's kind of a wasted effort. So yeah, they definitely go together.
Well, not to mention a name, but Mr. Anonymous said exactly the same thing just now. Is there a future for engineered completions?
Okay, Mr. Anonymous.
Can you tell us?
I think there is. Again, if you use effective downhole depth correlation devicing of some sort, like I say, short joints, gamma ray markers. Yeah, we've seen people get within 5 or 10 feet.
Yep,
without it. Chad, what's been your experience in most of the horizontals we look at?
My experience is that I've seen people spend a lot of money on diagnostics, multiple diagnostics on the project that utilized an engineered perforating system where they selected their perforations to be within like rock. And then they found out that they were 20 to 30 feet off depth for each of those stages. And that was well within, you know, margin of error of where they were trying to hit. So just completely ruined the entire project. Just a little bit of money to make sure that they were on depth before they got to that well, that they're going to spend a lot of money on diagnostics would have saved them a lot of trouble, because I see it as a failed experiment. If you're going to go in and test an engineered completion, then you have to make sure that those perforations are on depth. And if you've tested it before and it failed, you know, maybe that's what happened. And without diagnostics, you would never know, because that, like I said, that reader at surface is going to be perfect every time.
I've had pretty good luck on getting on depth on engineered completions by pulling a gamma ray on the first trip in with our pump down tools. We'll go in and on that first trip in, we'll log all the way out through the lateral, and we will, like Buddy said, have some short joints in there so we can get on depth with our casing string. And so I'm perforating off of the gamma character. Now, to the point earlier, if your gamma's not giving you much character, then that has limits.
As someone in the chat has commented that lack of perforation control is a big issue when running fiber as well. So it can have far-ranging effects. I think it was interesting. We were working with an operator in the Eagle Ford, and we were trying real hard to assure that all the clusters are getting treated and that they were targeting certain natural fractures is what they were targeting, and not doing a bad job. They used some downhole depth measurement devicing, and they were having good success. And then they kept bringing the clusters closer and closer together, and pretty soon they were carpet bombing the lateral, and it just seemed like it was wasn't much point in it any longer when your clusters are that close together. So that has to factor into the equation too. Okay, before we finish, and we're getting down to the stretch run here, I gave each one of you panelists this last question. And well, let's do the poll results first. There we go. What operational practices should be considered when completing child wells, altering the job size? So that's.
And I'm flunking this test.
That serves you right for giving too hard a test yourself. So modifying perforation scheme came in second, but altering job size, that really took the day. Interesting. About how many responses are we getting here, Derek? Can you tell? At least 100 for each poll question?
Yeah, a little over, kind of right in that area, depending on the question.
Okay, so that's a pretty good sample size there.
That's the problem with democracy. It can be wrong.
Yeah, if it doesn't agree with your position, right? Okay.
I'm a libertarian, so it doesn't matter.
Okay, again, I wanted to go over this last question. You've seen it. I just want your opinion in 25 words or less. How do you rate the following concepts? We've talked about most of these, maybe not all of them so far. This is sort of an individual poll of you folks. And I say 25 words or less, that means 5 or 6 words per topic. So I want your opinion. Works for me. Not had much luck with it. I think it's worth trying. I don't believe the physics work, so just a short answer. We don't need any equations, Tom, to justify your position. So again, here's the topics. Extreme limited entry completion designs. Tom, 5 words, 6 words. What do you think?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, you support it, or yeah, you tried it.
Yeah, I think I'd try it. I think I'd use it.
Okay.
I have a sense that it'll generate a better frac extension, but all I know about fractures is what you tell me, so I'm probably wrong.
You've overextended your word number. Jennifer, extreme limited completion, perforating completion designs.
I'm just still floored that you got Tom to have a 1-word answer. I like them. I do. I think it gives us, again, that chance of most efficient opportunity for what we're doing with them. So, yeah.
Lee?
I call it the most economical and reliable way to ensure high cluster efficiency.
Chad,
That was
Yep,
12
they're awesome.
words.
what was that, Chad?
Awesome.
Awesome.
2 thumbs up.
Paul Weddle, if you're in the audience out there, you know, this is getting you some good pub here. All right, second topic, diversion. Do you believe in it? Does it really work? Is it worth the expense? And I'm not limiting this just to far field. Let's just say particulate diversion in general. Do you think it's worth the price in general, horizontal wells? Give you good uniform distribution across all the perf clusters in the stage? Let's go backwards. Chad?
It needs to be optimized. It can be detrimental, especially in refracs. It can work against you, but it's got potential.
All right, so it can work in certain situations and it can be detrimental in others. All right, Lee, diversion, how do you feel about it?
Broad range of results, hard to be consistent and reliable.
Okay, Jennifer?
Yeah, inconsistent. I think the reliability is an issue. I bounce back to the extreme limited entry.
Okay, so you're saying if you have extreme limited entry, you don't need diversion, right? You don't need diverters. Okay, Tom? Tom?
Huh? Oh, yeah.
Your ADD is kicking in again.
So, you know, I was going to say I give my time to Chad because, like Lee, I've had a few experiences with it. And I don't want to say 50-50, but there was definitely a success case and there was definitely a failure case. So, but my experience is relatively limited.
Okay, sounds like inconsistency is the name of the game. Okay, next topic is microproppants.
I thought it was refracs.
Oh, I'm sorry. I can go in any order I want to.
Why don't we end on
The way I
refracs?
typed it.
Why don't
All
we
right,
end
do
on
refracs?
refracs?
All right, you can have your way. Refracs, what's your opinion on refracs? Lee, let's start in the middle. Surely you support them based on your experience.
I would say economically challenged. Can be beneficial in infill with child situation.
Okay. Chad?
The bullheads had a bad reputation, but I think there's an application there for low cost refracs, and if you need to re-stimulate your wellbore, then you have the capability of doing it with liners. They're good.
Okay. Jennifer?
Like them a lot, but they're not a silver bullet. They have to be done right and in the right area.
Okay. Tom?
I just think they're the only thing that we have other than drilling another well. And Chad said it, you know, that if it's 70% of the cost of a new well, you're going to end up flipping a coin. And I agree with that, Chad. That's a good point. I believe they have not been utilized to the point they should have. And if cost of services could be demonstrated and some diagnostics done, I think look, it's the only thing we can do that's really going to affect the communication with the reservoir other than drilling a new well. So what choice do we have?
Okay. All right, let's get the last poll question in here. So this is sort of for our benefit. What would you like to see included in future ProTech talks of this type? Basin specific discussion, incorporating technologies and industry trends, more on oil field chemistry, EOR optimization. What do you think would be another hot topic that would make for a good ProTech talk?
You know, buddy, we've kept almost everybody here for the whole time.
It's amazing. Well, when you have a top quality panel, what do you think is going to happen? All right, the last, we'll move on from that. The last concept I'd like your opinion on that I jumped ahead on a minute ago is microproppants. What do you think about microproppants? There's probably other terms for it, but we're talking about anything less than 200 mesh or 200 mesh or less, let's just say. Do they have a place? Are they beneficial?
They're very beneficial in the right application. Microfine fractures, near wellbore tortuosity, they're very helpful.
Okay. Jennifer.
Kind of boils down a little bit to maybe IP versus long-term recovery. I agree with Lee that they have some, initial benefits. If you're looking for them to provide you some long-term conductivity, I think the jury's out on that. A lot of the studies that I've seen are very short-term and early time, and I'd like to see us longer-term studies on some of those. So.
Okay. Tom?
Can I go after Chad, please?
No.
The first time I saw a presentation on this, it was 5 or 6 years ago. And I had a really hard time believing that something that small could have an effect. But after seeing basically talcum powder be pumped for the last 5 years, my answer would be probably why not? But I think there's a cost differential, and I'm not sure it's going to warrant general use. I was going to ask last so that I could prompt the conversation about, if you use micropropants, do you tail in with something else?
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, I would say most people would agree with that.
I don't think micropropants are the entire propant package. It's just a tool, particularly in the early stage of each pump schedule. Where you have a lot of near wellbore tortuosity. It can be very helpful with a dominant fracture where you can actually put, the larger type propant away.
About it, Chad? Is it the way to go?
I'm skeptical from some of the results that I've heard of based on the low amount of material they're actually injecting compared with the other products, normal 100 mesh, 2040, 4070. And the, that small of a material, given the kind of gains that are claimed, I have a little bit of trouble with that one. And I think they need to be studied more and tested. And they're difficult to test and prove up, besides the fact that you've used them on this well versus another well, and then we only report the wells that did awesome compared to their neighbors instead of the entire scope of the project. So it's kind of how I feel about them right now.
One of the some of the comments on micropropants from the chat line are, just a minute, jumping ahead on me. Good scouring agents. Micropropants typically in the pad, first sand stage, like a slug back in the day. Maybe near wellbore conditioner. So I guess there are different approaches as to what benefit they bring, and thus how you would want to apply them. Okay, let's see the results on the last poll question there, Derek. Oh, we're close on basin specific discussions.
I finally win.
Well, good. I'm happy you're ending on a high note here, Tom. So basin specific discussion, that would have gotten my vote as well. I think there's certain issues and topics associated with individual basins that we could focus on more completely. So before we go, since that was the winner, let me just survey the panelists on what basin would you like to see covered. If you had your choice of existing basins, which ones would you prefer?
I suggest Delaware.
Trust Delaware, okay. Who else, Chad?
The Barnett Shale, no, the Delaware.
Okay. Was that a yes nod, Jennifer?
Yeah, gotta say the Delaware.
Even if you're a Rockies person, you'd still go with the Delaware?
Yeah.
The Rockies will still be there.
You can still ski on them. All right, Lee, you gonna make it unanimous?
I'll be the odd man out, and I'd say mid-continent.
Wow, Chad, your territory, and he's outvoting you on mid-continent. How'd that happen? Why mid-continent, since you're different?
More time in the mid-continent probably than anywhere else.
Okay.
So you're saying favoritism, nepotism, that sort of thing? Why don't we say Vaca Muerta then?
Okay.
Sorry, I know, shut up.
That's all right. We're getting off track again, as usual. Well, folks, thanks so very much for your participation. Derek, if I've forgotten anything that I should have done?
Nope, we're all set. Good job.
Okay, great. Well, thanks so very much for spending the time with us. I know your time, you guys are very, very valuable. And I wanted to make a couple of comments about Tom and Jennifer. I know I've given Tom a little hard time, but he's used to that. He gives it back, of course. Being academics, I've come to meet a number of your students in the past. And I'll have to say they speak so extremely highly of both of you. In Tom's case, I know you go well out of your way to try to find jobs for people, for your former students. You and I both know of one of your former students that took way longer to get his master's degree.
Yeah, we spent too much time on a frac truck, but he was a hell of a student.
Yeah, yes.
For a guy to walk in off the street and work as hard as he did, man, he was a hell of a student.
If you're online, Steve, a little plug for you there. And Jennifer, in your case, you relate so well to your students. They just love you to death. You know, they feel like you're one of them. Obviously, you're teaching them, but they just feel a very close kinship to you.
Well, she's only in her 30s.
I know, prematurely gray. We know that. But
Buddy, I appreciate that.
I've even heard them say that you participated in some of the football polls. So, you know, I think that's a great thing. You really want to relate to them, and they all speak very highly of what they've learned from both of you. Lee, of course, you went to the University of Texas. You know, I don't know about the quality of teaching down there, but we do know that there's some awfully good professors there, like Dr. Sharma, one of my good buddies there, among others. And Chad, of course, they keep changing the name of your school, so I'm sure there were good professors there. They just settle on a name and stick with it. That'd probably be advantageous.
That's from a guy from Tennessee. Holy cow.
Okay, folks. Hey, it's been fun. It's been informative. I hope the audience feels the same way. Somebody just said, great panel. Thanks, y'all. Another thanks, everyone. Appreciate it. Somebody said Appalachian. Oh, that's the
We're talking about the basin.
That's the basin, Appalachian. Okay, well, thanks, everybody. Thanks for the chat input. Thanks so very much for spending the time with us, folks. And Tom, ease up on that all weekend final exam, would you please? That's a little much.
I'll do. I'll make a shameless plug here for my personal life beverage. So.
Okay, that's definitely shameless. Well, thanks very much. We appreciate the time, the effort. You could have charged us a consulting fee to spend this much time with us. We appreciate you doing it for free.
It's free?
Oh, it is free. No, we told you that, didn't we? So everybody go out and find some wells that we can initiate an infill development strategy on now that we know how to do it. So everyone take care, be safe, be well, and thanks for joining us.
Best to all.
Everybody. Thanks, everybody. It's a lot of
Thanks,
fun.
everybody.
Bye-bye.
Enjoyed it.
Buddy, you want us to stay on or click off?
Yeah, you might stay on for a minute. Just get some feedback from you. Derek, is that okay with you?
Yep.
He has to isolate us, though.
Yeah, 1 second.
Tom, in the future, might be a good idea to have a little background imaging of some sort.
You don't like my
Like
Pancho
wall.
Villa thing?
Is that what that is?
I don't even use a camera very often. It's offering
Can't see it.
for attention gringos